turn it over to the Trinity Spiritual Center founding director, Mark Grayson.
Thanks, Sharon. So I have to say, Matthew, that we are very excited to be hosting a series of conversations with you about your heart-centered approach to contemplative work. And I personally am very pleased that we figured this out, because my own journey with you has been one that I am very, very grateful for. I thought maybe I'd just share a little bit about that to get us started. 5 years ago or so, I was at a retreat at Holy Cross Monastery with the Mirabai Star. And Matthew dropped into the retreat for about 30 minutes. And I have to say that I was completely dazzled by the sort of nonchalant way in which he imparted some wisdom and insight to all of us in the 30 minutes that we spent with him. So a couple of years after that, I found myself on a personal retreat at the monastery, and I reached out to him and we connected, and we were just chit-chatting away. And I said to him, you know, Matthew, I've been meditating for 40 years and it's beginning to get a little stale. Do you have any ideas about how I can sort of adjust my practice? And within about 15 minutes, he had me figured out and was helping me focus my attention more on my heart and torso in that area than all the head stuff that I was doing. And that fundamental shift has unfolded now for several years. And it's exactly the kind of thing that we might actually accomplish today with Matthew. So I hope, in fact, that you all find this as rewarding as I have. And for those of you who are joining this workshop without the benefit of his bio, which is in the digital brochure from the center, we can send that out to everybody if you don't have a copy. Just, you know, put it in the chat. Matthew is the priest in charge at St. Gregory's Episcopal Church. He's also a Sufi practitioner. And he's had many, many mentors across several faith traditions, all of which he incorporates into his work. So the ones that come to mind are Cynthia Bourgeot, and then, of course, the teachings of Camille and Kabir Helminski. I guess the only other thing that I think is important to know is that he's married to Yannick, who's equally fabulous and works at the monastery. And so with that, Matthew, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be with all of you, and it's good to see some familiar faces in the Zoom crowd and some new faces and names. Hi, Carol. Thanks for the wave. Yeah, it's a delight, Mark, to be invited by you to the Trinity Center for Spirituality to share some about heart-centered practice tonight, which is really, or this afternoon, which is really, for me, of anything that I teach or share, this work with the heart is the most central and essential, I find, and in some ways the most simple. So I'll say a little bit more about the terrain we're going to explore, but I want to first just to start with a little moment of practice to arrive from wherever we're arriving from, a little bit of silence and an opening chant that you can join your voices to. So first, just take a moment to bring your awareness to your breath. And bringing awareness still continually to the breath as it rises and falls. And perhaps also noticing your heart beat and the rhythm of your pulse as it courses through your body. I like to think of these two, the breath and the heartbeat, as our built-in prayer beads. They're always there to call us back to center, to remind us of the divine life coursing through us moment by moment. And held in the breath and the heartbeat, we open this circle and we begin in the name of God, who is lover, beloved, and love overflowing. Holy Trinity, holy dance of life in whom we live and move and have our being. And as we settle in, I invite you to join your voices to mine in this chant if you're so moved, or just to let it wash over you. The words are simply changeless and calm, deep mystery, ever more deeply rooted in thee. Changeless and calm, deep mystery, ever more deeply rooted in thee. Changeless and calm, deep mystery, ever more deeply rooted in thee. Changeless and calm, deep mystery, ever more deeply rooted in thee. Changeless and calm, deep mystery, ever more deeply rooted in thee. And so we pray, Holy One, root us ever more deeply in the deep mystery of our being, in the deep mystery of your being. Open the eye of our hearts that we might see you in every face and facet of creation. And let your Spirit stir and move among us now as our guest and our guide. Amen. So welcome again, friends, into the circle. There are multiple ways of knowing available to the human being, and for the last few hundred years or so, we've largely cultivated a head-centered, mental, rational mode of knowing, which has great gifts and has created wonderful advancements for us. And at the same time, we've allowed another mode of knowing, a heart-centered way of knowing, to atrophy. And I want to look tonight at how to bring the heart back online as an organ of spiritual perception, as a knowing organ, as a means of seeing, so to speak. And we'll do this work against a Christian backdrop, but I hope you can hear the Christian language and terminology that this teaching is rooted in the widest, most expansive way possible. Remembering that Jesus is a universal human treasure, not a tribal deity that belongs to one social club, but a universal human treasure. And that the Christian practices of contemplative prayer and heart opening are really part of the shared spiritual resources of the human family. And so we're going to be engaging Jesus and his heart-centered wisdom within that spirit, and a spirit of openness and sharing. And I often remind myself that Jesus never heard the word Christian in his lifetime, that he did not come to propagate the identity marker Christian, to slap that label on as many people as possible, but rather that he came to awaken hearts and transform lives. And so we want to look at some of the heart transforming wisdom of Jesus tonight. And I want to start diving into that with Jesus himself as a contemplative figure, as a figure of the contemplative lineage of our Christian tradition, that it's not something that begins with desert monastics or Benedictine monks, but it begins with Jesus himself, that he stands at the headwaters of this. And what should perhaps be obvious to us, but isn't always obvious, is that Jesus, standing in a Jewish wisdom tradition, himself had a regular contemplative practice. And how can I say that? How do I know what Jesus' life of practice looked like? Well, it's recorded for us in the pages of the Gospels. So, for example, in Mark's Gospel, we're told very directly that early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up and went to a quiet place, and there he prayed. And we see this as a practice in his life, that regularly he gets up in the morning while it's still dark and roots and grounds himself in God before engaging the needs of the day. So he engages the needs of the world out of that contemplative grounding. We could say that Jesus models the way of the contemplative activist. He very much cares about the needs of the world and the pain of the world, but he engages it from a grounding in his own contemplative heart. And we see that he maintains a contemplative rhythm to his life and ministry. So throughout his life and ministry, we see him retreating from the busyness of active ministry and teaching, and he'll say to the disciples, let's get in the boat and go to the other side of the lake. Let us get away to a quiet place for a while. Or he'll take a few of the disciples and say, hey, let's take a hike to the top of this mountain. He's regularly retreating to nature and to solitude, not to escape from the needs of the world, but to more fully prepare himself to engage the needs of the world. So that rhythm of contemplation and engagement continually flows through his ministry. And as I said, we see him going away for morning silence as a daily practice, but we don't know what Jesus' method of contemplative prayer was. What was he doing in those periods of silent prayer? Was he praying the Jesus prayer? Probably not. Was he saying his centering prayer word? Well, we don't know. I like to think that maybe Abba, that name, that intimate name for God, was his centering prayer word. Abba, Abba, echoing in the cave of his heart. But while we don't know what his method in these periods of silent prayer was, we do know what the method of early Christians was. We have the writings of the desert Abbas and Ammas, or the desert fathers and mothers, very soon after the life of Jesus and the apostles, who write about their contemplative practice. And I think there's good reason to believe that we can draw a direct line from the desert, heart-centered contemplative tradition straight back through the apostles right to the heart of Jesus. So we're going to track that progression during this time together. And as I said, Jesus didn't come out of nowhere. He came out of a grounding in a pre-existing Jewish wisdom tradition, or a Jewish contemplative and mystical tradition. And Cynthia Bourgeau, whom Mark mentioned, who's an Episcopal priest and contemplative teacher, Cynthia likes to say that Jesus came in the great succession of Hebrew prophets in fulfillment of a promise that we see running through Scripture. And it's the promise of a softened or an awakened or a human heart. So a few examples. The prophet Ezekiel, or the divine voice speaking through the prophet Ezekiel, says, "I will give them one heart." Not lots of separate hearts. I will give them one collective heart. I will give them one heart and put a new spirit within them. And I will remove the heart of stone from their flesh and give them a heart of flesh, a softened heart. And then again, the divine voice speaks through the prophet Jeremiah. "This is the covenant I will make with them after those days. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people." So there's this pointing towards an interiorization of religion, that it's no longer external laws and rules written on tablets of stone, but it's an internal process of awakening, that the law is something spontaneous that arises from within our hearts rather than externally imposed. And so Cynthia likes to say that Jesus comes as the great master cardiologist who fulfills this promise. He's the great master cardiologist who performs the heart surgery on us, who shows us how to awaken and soften and to have this new heart, this collective heart. And what I want to do is look at the desert teachings on this shortly after the life of Jesus. But first I want to approach it by way of something that might seemingly come out of left field, but that actually is verifying this ancient wisdom from within a scientific milieu or perspective. So I want to look a little bit at some research that's been coming out of an institute called the Institute for Heart Math, as in mathematics. And some of you may know the Institute for Heart Math. They're probably going on 30 years old now. They're a California-based research group that for a few decades have been doing work measuring what they call the energetic heart. And so if you're not aware of this, the human body produces electromagnetic fields that are scientifically measurable. And what HeartMath has been doing, they've been hooking people up to EKGs or electrocardiograms and measuring the electromagnetic field that's specifically generated by the human heart. And what they've found is that the heart generates the largest electromagnetic field in all of the human body. And that the field generated by the human heart is almost 60 times greater in amplitude than the field that's generated by human brain waves. And so our heart is actually measurable several feet outside of our bodies. And that field is actually communicating, relaying energetic information. And the other important thing they found is that the human heart is made up of almost 60% neuron cells. We used to think the heart was just muscle. It's just muscle cells pumping blood. Well, no, scratch that. That's totally wrong. Your heart is made up of neuron cells that are like a brain in your heart, that are receiving and relaying information throughout your body. And so if you've ever walked into a room and before anything was said, you felt that someone was depressed or angry or joyful before you heard a word from their mouth, we used to call this intuition. We're starting to learn that actually the electromagnetic field of each of our hearts is holding energetic emotional information in it. We're communicating at a subtle energetic level through our hearts. And your heart picks up and reads the information that other hearts are putting out into the world, and it communicates it to you. So what we once thought of as woo-woo intuition, we're starting to realize is actually a very valid form of knowing and an actual reading of information. Now, HeartMath also did some research on people's pets, because anything with a heart generates a heart field. And they found that when a person's pet was hooked up to the electrocardiogram, the separation anxiety when their person left the room would register in the heart field. And more interestingly, a pet could often detect the approach of their person before they came through the door, because their heart field several feet outside of their body had already entered the room. So they were already picking up the energy signature of their human. So again, we're reading and relaying information continually. So here's a quotation from HeartMath. They write, well, let me back up and tell you what they did. So then they gave people what they called heart-centered breathing exercises. And little did they know, they were actually giving people ancient forms of Christian contemplative practice, because we'll see that these ancient contemplative practices were also heart-centered in their approach. So they would have people put their awareness in their hearts and just focus on their breathing and allow them to come into a contemplative spaciousness through that breathing. And as they watched the heart field, they found that the energy signature in the heart field became much more radiant, so to speak, much more coherent and whole as you moved into contemplative spaciousness. And the field of the heart and the field of the brain waves began to move into sync with each other. The heart and the brain began to move into entrainment. They came into alignment. And so often human beings are moving through the world out of integrity, in the sense that our heart is running that way and our head is running that way, and the two aren't in sync. They're not in communication. And contemplative spaciousness in our being allows them to move into alignment. So here's a quote from HeartMath about heart-centered breathing. They say, the shift in heart rhythm that they read on the electrocardiogram, the shift in heart rhythm in turn plays an important role in facilitating higher cognitive functions, creating emotional stability and facilitating states of calm. Over time, this establishes a new inner baseline reference, a type of implicit memory that organizes perception, feelings, and behavior. So we begin to lay down a new baseline of heart-centered consciousness that reorganizes our emotional life, that reorganizes our capacity for creative thinking and higher cognitive functioning. We have greater access to those parts of our brain when we're centered and in contemplative awareness. So what they found is that contemplative practice actually creates increased personal coherence. We become more coherent as individuals. But then they found that that increases social coherence. So for example, if I'm in a jumbled state and I walk into the room and Mark Grayson is in a deeply heart-centered contemplative space, and he holds that open heart-centered energy in the room, it makes it easier for my heart to sync up with that spaciousness. My heart can begin to sink into entrainment with his heart. And then if Mark and I are in a contemplative space and one of you walks into the room, it's going to be that much easier for your heart to sync up into that collective heart. Again, the words of the prophet, I will give them one heart. So there's this sense of actually growing a collective heart field. And so this is one of the reasons, if you've ever practiced contemplative prayer in a group, in an embodied physical group together, sometimes you can drop into a depth of practice much more easily when you're sitting in a room with others than you can when you're by yourself. And it's because you're actually building a collective energetic platform that supports each other and that allows everyone to sink into that place more easily, because we're all holding and supporting each other. So HeartMath, their research complements beautifully the research coming out of the field of neuroscience. So at the same time that HeartMath has been measuring the heart field, neuroscientists have been measuring what happens in the brain during contemplative practice. And You may know that the human brain, it's essentially 4 brains in one. There's what's sometimes called our reptilian brain or our hind brain, and it covers, it controls our fight or flight responses. So do I freeze, do I kill it, or do I run away from it? It's our defensive reactive brain, and we share it with lizards, so it's called the reptilian brain. And on top of that, we've evolved what's called the old mammalian or the emotional cognitive brain. And we share that with other higher order mammals. Cats and dogs have emotional lives. Apes, chimpanzees, monkeys have emotional lives. So this old mammalian brain allows emotional connection. And on top of that, we've evolved the neocortex, which allows creative intelligence essentially to come into a situation. And then there's the prefrontal lobes, which serve an overall harmonizing and integrating effect for the brain as a whole. And so what neuroscientific research into contemplative practice has found is that when someone is sitting in practice, the way stimuli get routed through our brain begins to change. So if you have no contemplative spaciousness in your being and a stimulus comes into your field of experience, bam, it immediately gets routed to your hindbrain, fight or flight. And we move into reactive, unconscious reactive behaviors. But if someone through practice has cultivated that contemplative spaciousness, when that same field of experience, that stimulus comes into your field of experience, it's routed through the hindbrain into the neocortex, the prefrontal lobes, and suddenly you're no longer reacting. You can now consciously act. You can make a conscious choice. There's space between stimulus and reaction. And so contemplative practice literally rewires our brains. It literally makes the more higher evolved centers of our brains available to us. Especially in moments of tension or stress when we would retreat into our lizard brain. So I just want to front load with that background information that verifies from the scientific world much of what this ancient tradition that we're going to look at has been saying for 2,000 years. And so I want to turn our attention in that direction, and then we're actually going to do a little practice work together around heart-centered contemplation. So, like I said, we don't know what Jesus' method was, but we know what the desert mothers and fathers were doing. And I want to look at the map that comes down to us from that early Christian wisdom tradition. And what they tell us is that the human being is essentially designed as an amphibious being. We're made to live in 2 worlds at once. So a frog is amphibious because it can live both inland and in water and on land. The human being, it said, is designed to live both in time and in eternity. We're amphibious in that we have the capacity to live simultaneously in time and eternity. And so they talk about this using the symbolism of the cross, which is so central to the Christian tradition. So if we draw a cross here, we can understand this vertical axis as the axis of eternity and the horizontal axis as the axis of our life and time. And most of us, most of the time, are fairly fused to the horizontal axis. We're just plodding along our journey here in time. We're fused to our little ego narrative and the worries and concerns and drama of our life and time. And often that's all we know, just that little horizontal plodding unfolding. But the contemplative tradition says, wait, there's more to the picture. There is this vertical axis of your being, the axis of eternity, God, infinite spirit, that is continually intersecting with and breaking through into your life and time. And you can, through practice, cultivate awareness of that other dimension and begin living more and more from that dimension, not later when you die, but right here and now. And so what these practitioners said was, well, first of all, let me say, if you map the cross over the human body, what is the point of intersection? The human heart. So the heart is understood in this tradition as the point of intersection, as the center of the human being, where time and eternity meet. And so we see the Christian mystics talking about the heart as the bridal chamber, where the marriage of heaven and earth takes place, where the union of the human lover and the divine beloved takes place in the bridal chamber of the heart. T.S. Eliot once said that to live at the intersection of time and timelessness is the occupation of the saint. To live at the intersection of time and timelessness, or to live from the heart, is the occupation of the saint. And we should remember here that the saint isn't an ethereal being floating on the clouds. The saint is the fully human being. The saint is the human being fully alive. So we can understand the heart as essentially an intertidal zone. It's the place where we wash into God and God washes into us. The heart is like a channel that opens into the great infinite ocean of being, opens inward to God and opens outward to this finite world. And the goal of contemplative discipleship is to learn to stand on the threshold between those two worlds. Can we stand, can our life become a balancing act between time and eternity? So I want to read a quote to you from Callistos Ware, and he is an Eastern Orthodox archbishop who's deeply steeped in this tradition. And so this is how the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition describes the heart. He writes, "The heart indicates the human person in its fullness, in its unity. Above all, the heart is a symbol of wholeness, of integrity, of integration. So when we speak of the prayer of the heart, what we mean is prayer of the total person, prayer in which the one who prays is altogether taken into the prayer. Heart, body, mind, soul are all taken into prayer." So this is what we're going to begin exploring, what Callistos Ware here calls the prayer of the heart. And I like to think of this in contemporary idiom as heartfulness practice. So most of us are familiar with the borrowed language from Eastern traditions of mindfulness practice. And if I were to say, "Where is your mind?" where would you point? Most of us would point to our heads. Of course, in Buddhist and other Eastern traditions, when they talk about mind in this sense, they're talking about big mind. Mind permeates your whole being. It's consciousness itself. But we tend to go up into our heads. That's where our mind is. And so I think for those of us in the Western context, heartfulness is a really helpful word because it reminds us to take our prayer out of our heads and into our hearts and into our bodies. That heartfulness permeates our whole being. So in the desert tradition, they talked about the work of drawing the mind into the heart. And sometimes they even said something as extreme as, this is the goal of the entire Christian spiritual journey, the work of drawing the mind into the heart. And what they understood by this was that the mind, by which they meant our rational mental faculties, the mind tends to see by way of separation. And this isn't a problem. This is a tool that we need to function in this plane of being. But the mind tends to cut the playing field up into parts and pieces, into subject and object, into me and you, into us and them. The mind sees by way of parts and pieces. And we need a mind that can do that. We need to know how much flour to measure out to put in the cake we're baking. We need a mind that can quantify and calculate. The heart, however, sees by way of wholeness. sees by way of connection and interrelationship, and it reads by way of resonance. Literally, we know now the heart is reading the resonant energetic fields around it. It's reading into the being of other beings through interrelationship, reading from wholeness rather than subject-object division. So this is sometimes called, and this relates to this map of the two worlds we live in. It's said that we live in a quantitative universe and a qualitative universe. So the quantitative universe is the universe of measurements. We can measure it, we can analyze it. The qualitative universe is the invisible universe of qualities, things that can't be measured by the rational mind, but that can be read and known by the heart. So things like truth, beauty, love, joy, peace. We know these qualities, we know their reality, but the mind can't calculate or quantify those, but the heart can experience them. And so we want to learn to live not just in that quantitative, but also to live in that qualitative universe. So this is another lovely quotation. This comes from Kabir Helminski, who Mark also mentioned. So he's talking about the heart's job of reading that qualitative universe. He writes, "The heart is the antenna that receives the emanations of subtler levels of existence. The human heart has its proper field of function beyond the limits of the superficial reactive ego self. Awakening the heart is an unlimited process of making the mind more sensitive, focused, energized, subtle, and refined, joining it to its cosmic milieu, the infinity of love." The heart joins us to the cosmic milieu that is the infinity of love. So early Christians tied this to Jesus' teachings, and significantly one of his teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. You may remember Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for," do you remember? He says, "For they shall see God." Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And we tend to hear this with our Western ears as, "Blessed are the pure in heart now, for they shall see God later when they die and go to heaven." But the contemplative tradition says, no, when the heart is purified, when the heart is awakened and opened and brought online, with the eye of the heart, we see God here and now. We see the one in whom we live and move and have our being. We see God in every face, in every rock and tree and creature. We see God. The heart sees that wholeness and that oneness, whereas the mind sees duality. So they also took seriously Jesus' prayer at the end of John's Gospel. May they all be one as you and I are one. May we all awaken to that oneness. And they found that certain practices allowed them to access and stabilize the heart's knowing. So that's what we're going to try now. And this is a practice that works with a force that they call in these writings attention, which is just like it sounds, the word attention. And I point out the word attention because for those of us who have been schooled in or steeped in the practice of centering prayer, which is a contemporary Christian contemplative method, the focus here is slightly different. So in centering prayer, in a nutshell, your focus is simply on your intention to surrender, to consent to the operation of the indwelling Holy Spirit within your being. And you release thoughts, you release words, and you just return to your intention using a sacred word, your intention, your consent to surrender. And intention is everything. In the Eastern Christian prayer of the heart, attention is much more the focus. And they specifically say, put your attention in your heart center. And they mean this very physically. So I want to give you a little taste of what it is to work with attention first. So if you're taking notes, just take a moment to finish your sentence and put your pen down and just come into a practice posture, just a comfortable sitting position. And as you're able, again, just come back to your breath for a moment. And then as you're able, allow your awareness to shift into your feet. Feel your feet in sensation from the inside out. This is different from thinking about your feet in your head. This is placing attention inside your feet. They might kind of tingle or come online as they're filled with attention. And let that attention move up your ankles, up the calves of your legs, and feel that whole lower half of your leg and your feet and your toes held in attention and conscious awareness. And then try moving attention into your hands, into the palms of your fingers, into your palms and into your fingers. And feel your hands alive, held in attention, sensation from the inside out. You might notice your pulse as it courses through your fingers. And let that same attention move gently up through your wrists, up to your elbows, and feel your lower arms and your hands in attention. So can you get a little sense of what that feels like to actually place attention or awareness into one or the other parts of your body, the way they come online, come alive? So we're going to now try moving that into the heart center, which is where this practice really begins. And so first, just bring awareness to your breath. You might imagine that you're breathing in and out through your heart center. You are. Your lungs reside in that same bandwidth as your heart. Just feel the rise and fall of your breath. And to sort of bring online the heart center, I want to guide you through a guided exercise that I sometimes call the back door into the heart. Often we're not as acquainted with our heart center. Sometimes it's harder to feel it or bring it online. And so with your breath, with your awareness in your breath, I want you to visualize with the eye of your heart the face of a beloved. And the beloved can take many forms. This could be a beloved cat purring in your lap. This could be a beloved dog jumping to greet you. It could be a beloved spouse or partner, child or grandchild, teacher or friend. It could even be a beloved place in nature, a beloved tree. But this is a face of the beloved in whose presence your heart opens in joy, opens in gratitude and love. And just visualize with the eye of your heart that beloved and breathe through their presence and notice what opens, what happens within your heart center as you do so. And if you find yourself pulling into mental space, just return to the presence of the beloved and to the opening of your heart, with the breath as an anchor. Breathing through the joy or gratitude or love. And then as you're able, allow yourself to gently thank and release this face of the beloved, and then simply to remain in the qualities themselves, now objectless. Just now gratitude, gratituding, love, loving, joy, joying, without a focal point, without an object of devotion. Just rest in that presence and in those qualities. The Sufi poet Rumi says, the greatest love is love with no object. Or we might say love that embraces every object. And so just rest in love, loving, anchored in your heart. And as you rest in that space, listen to these words from Saint Theophan the Recluse, who was a Russian Orthodox monk schooled in the ways of the prayer of the heart. He writes, attention placed in the heart gives birth to warm tenderness of heart, which in turn increases attention. They grow in strength together, supporting each other. They give depth to prayer, gradually quickening the heart. Banishing distraction and wandering thoughts, they bestow on prayer its purity. When attention descends into the heart, it attracts all the powers of soul and body into one place there. This concentration of all human life in one place is immediately reflected in the heart by a special sensation that is the beginning of future warmth. This sensation, faint at the beginning, becomes gradually firmer, stronger, deeper. And so resting in that heart presence and in the qualities of tenderness, of warmth, of sweetness. You can open your eyes if you want. So we're going to add another step or two to this practice, but can you begin to get a sense, a hint of what it is to shift awareness into the place of the heart? So very often we're anchored in our heads, and we've learned to stake our sense of selfhood in our heads. We think I am this, I am my thoughts, and my body is just riding, it's just there to carry my head around. When we drop into the heart, we begin to discover a quality of presence, of simplicity, of spaciousness, and we're essentially learning to stake a new seat or center of selfhood. What is it for that to be my core identity rather than all my racing thoughts? So this practice begins cultivating what Cynthia Bourgeault calls magnetic center. She says that it's like we're growing a magnet in our chest. There's this magnetic center that begins to come online, and the pull and the force of that magnet becomes stronger the more we energize it through our practice. So these are some words from Cynthia, and this points to the way the Eastern prayer of the heart and the method of centering prayer can dovetail. Because often centering prayer practitioners say they find that as they surrender thoughts and return to their sacred word, awareness begins to naturally drop with each release of thinking into this heart space. What the Eastern tradition adds to that is you don't have to wait for awareness to drop into your heart after 15 years of practice. You can just put it there when you sit down in your chair or on your cushion. So here's Cynthia's words. She says, through the constant practice of the letting go, of the surrendering of thoughts, not for any reason other than the pure gift of surrender, something develops in us that learns this gesture. And experienced practitioners of centering prayer rather quickly come to the place where they feel at the center of their being this tug, this visceral tug in the heart, this honing in on the divine presence. And it has nothing to do with thinking about it in the mind. It's not in the mind. It's totally visceral. But something through the process of yielding, through the actual act of surrender, develops a very clearly magnetic center. And then you have your homing beacon in you, and you can follow. You can follow reliably the divine hologram, the pattern of your life as it unfolds from the point of God, and not screw up the pattern and the unfolding because you're frightened or hiding something or have something in denial, all those things. You go with the pattern. So she's saying that through practice, we awaken a homing beacon that is our very heart. And not only a homing beacon, but also a sense of home. Often we find as we drop into that spaciousness of the heart, we go, oh, I'm home. Ah, this is where I belong. We find that warmth, that tenderness, that sweetness, it's been with us and within us all along. All we have to do is drop into it. And we may begin to find as we go into the heart that it's very hard to find the line where I end and God begins, that I open into the divine heart and the divine heart opens into me. And is it that I'm, as I drop into the ground of my heart, is this the ground of my heart, or is this the heart in which all creation is held? And it's always both, because our hearts are unique expressions of that one heart of God that's beating uniquely in each of us. And so through our hearts, we drop into the heart of God. So this practice adds classically one more piece, which is what we might call a mantra or a sacred word. And in the Eastern Church, that mantra has classically been what's called the Jesus prayer. And it's so often partnered with the prayer of the heart that often they become synonyms. And so you'll hear prayer of the heart and the Jesus prayer used as interchangeable terms. I like to distinguish slightly between them and understand prayer of the heart as the actual energetic work with the heart. It's just being in that center, in that presence. And the Jesus prayer is a word prayer that can serve as an anchor in and for that work. So again, St. Theophan writes, whether it be the Jesus prayer or any other short prayer, it is good if it is always in the mouth, that you're always saying it. Only take care that the attention is in the heart and not in the head. And hold to this not only when standing in prayer, but at all other times as well. He's saying we should at all times have some degree of awareness anchored in the heart, that brings a different kind of knowing online for us. And so this is, again, where there's a slight distinction between Eastern practice and some other forms, because the heart, the word, the sacred word, is said in the heart. And this is a revolutionary idea for many of us who have been taught to repeat a sacred word, and unknowingly, we've just been saying the word in our heads. So I'm in my head, saying a sacred word in my head, trying to let go of thoughts in my head, and it's all going on from the neck up. So the Eastern Church says, put the word in the heart. So that's what we're going to try now. If you hear a bell in the background, it's Holy Cross Monastery. They're ringing the bell, calling the brothers to prayer. So we will join them in our prayer. So the Jesus prayer in its long form is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And the most common form, it's simply, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. I learned this prayer from an Anglican nun, an Episcopalian nun, who taught it to me as Jesu mercy. Just breathing in Jesu or Jesus, Jesus or Jesu on the in-breath, mercy on the out-breath. So you breathe in the love held in that name, and you breathe out mercy and compassion to all creation. Jesu, mercy. So if you have a centering prayer word or a sacred word that you use in practice, I would invite you to use your word if you have a very comfortable one that's home for you. If you don't have a word and you would like to try one, you could try this Jesu mercy practice. I could offer other words, but I don't want to put too many things out there on the table right now and get bogged down in that. So I want to come to practice. So allow yourself to come back to your breathing. And as you're able, lean back into that space of the heart. If you could touch that warmth or sweetness earlier, even just a glimmer of it, see if you can return to that. You might even place a hand gently over your heart center as an additional anchor if it helps. And let attention come to the rising and falling of the breath. And then as you're ready, I invite you to add your sacred word paired with your breath. And if you don't have one and would like to use the simple form of the Jesus prayer, you can breathe in Jesu and breathe out mercy. But the key here is to feel into what it is to say the word in your heart and not in your head. See if you can let the word echo in the cave of your heart, sound in the cave of your heart. Let it sound there with your breath. And so as you're ready, you can add the word. And if the word is a distraction and falls away, you can just rest in presence itself. And if you find yourself pulling up by the force of muscle memory into familiar mental space, just again, let awareness sink, drop, expand down into the heart, using the breath or the word in the heart as your anchor. As your anchor in the heart's tenderness and sweetness. And allow your heart awareness to become spacious. You can let awareness expand out to hold the sounds arising in the room around you, or from beyond the walls. Nothing pushed away, everything just arising within the ground, within the open space of your heart. Perhaps you can sense the way in which it is not simply that your heart is within your body, but rather that your body is held within the field of your heart, opening out infinitely. Again, St. Theophan writes, if the mind becomes exhausted by saying the words of the prayer, then pray without words, bowing down before the Lord inwardly in your heart and giving yourself to God. This is true prayer. Words are only prayer's expression and are always weaker in God's eyes than prayer itself. And again from St. John Chrysostom, writing in the 4th century about the Jesus prayer. He says, the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, descending into the depths of the heart, will subdue the serpent holding sway over the pastures of the heart, and will save our soul and bring it to life. Thus abide constantly with the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, so that the heart swallows the Lord, and the Lord the heart, and the two become one. This beautiful vision of our heart swallowing God's heart, and God's heart swallowing our hearts, and the two becoming a single heart, one heart. And so as you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. And if you would like, you can turn your camera on or unmute yourself if you feel like sharing at all. And thought we could just take a few moments and see what this experience has been for others. Maybe we can speak to the mechanics of practicing a bit, or your own experience in practice. If anyone would like to share in the chat box or here vocally, what was it like to lean into the heart in a practice like this? And there's no right or wrong answer. You could say, I could not feel my heart at all. You could say, well, that was very difficult and uncomfortable, or that was entirely new, or hey, that's where I go in prayer every day. So no right or wrong answer, but any responses, just unmute yourself and share. Maybe say your name before you speak if you want to speak. Mark, were you going to share?
Yeah, I think I was once again surprised at how natural it's almost as if want to go there. The practice is, at least that was my experience. Sort of to drop into that space it's almost, we're sort of doing it anyway as we interact with each other every day.
Yeah, we're wired for it, we're made for it, and it's home. And the wonderful thing you said, as we engage with each other every day, the wonderful thing about a practice like this is that it's not a practice that can only happen 20 minutes twice a day on a meditation cushion. It's a practice you can take into your daily life. And so you can have awareness anchored in your heart, maybe with a sacred word repeating itself as you walk the dog, or as you wash the dishes, or as you have a conversation with a friend. Let's see, people are having trouble unmuting, I just saw. So now anyone who wants to share will be able to unmute yourselves. And so this practice, as I was saying, it's a practice for daily life. And it's actually very practical in that sense, because we can take it into our relationships. So this is where contemplative practice becomes really grounded. Let's say that you find yourself in a really tense moment with a family member or a friend, or during a board meeting, and you find yourself beginning to race up into your head and to start to, come up with the perfect words you're going to say to best your opponent. Maybe something cutting or biting. If you instead redirect awareness to your heart, drop into your heart center, you'll find that it changes the dynamics of the playing field entirely. When you are in your heart, you physically cannot say something from a defensive or a reactive place. The heart won't allow it. To do that, you first have to disconnect from your heart. You've got to retreat into mental space. And then you can be cruel or biting or argumentative. But if you drop into the heart, you become vulnerable and non-defensive. And I found this practically helpful so many times. I remember being in a board meeting a few years ago where a friend of mine said something that to me came across as racist. And I was really put on edge by it and found myself getting very angry. And it was sort of a critique of identity politics, and I found myself like getting on the defensive, and then I thought, wait, if I say anything right now, I'll be speaking from reactivity, and I'll probably only pour ego fuel on the fire. And I thought, let me wait until I can speak from my breath and my heart. And so I came to my breath, and I waited until I knew I was speaking from my heart, and then I was able to say, I'm feeling a lot of anger in my body right now, and here's what's happening for me. And then it was very different from saying, you said this and you did this, and there was no reaction or finger pointing. There was just non-defensive vulnerability. And then the other person didn't need to defend themselves because I hadn't attacked them. And then they were able to meet me vulnerably, and a conversation unfolded that led to deeper understanding. And everything shifted. And I realized if I had not waited to speak from my contemplative heart, if I just dove in from my initial anger, well, I don't like to think how that meeting would have concluded. And so this again is where contemplative heart-centered practice becomes very practical and relational. Yeah, Harold, I see your hand up.
It's Harry, but that's okay. Thanks so much I have the wrong name up there. It's Harry. Thank you so much for pointing out that connectedness of the heart, Matthew. We at the Trinity Southport Meditation Room meet twice weekly on Zoom typically, and we did not meet during July and August. We had our first meeting last Sunday. We're not meeting tonight because you're here with us this afternoon. But the great thing about it was so many people last week voiced, boy, it was tough over the summer doing meditation and contemplation, so that energy of the heart that we all share, and that you pointed out, was validated in our own experience. So I just wanted to point that out and say to others who are online, please join us for that meditation room on Sunday night. Just contact me, Harry Schmitz. All of that information is on the Trinity Southport website, but we'd love to have you. But the other thing, it's more now a personal question. And that is, I found two things happening tonight. When you dealt with attention, before you said the words, and I'm wondering if this is an extension of this heart, even on Zoom, my feet were tingling. My hands were tingling. It happened before I even knew where you were going with. And feet were the first, so I didn't know you were going to go there. And I became conscious before the word said, go there. Mm-hmm. The other thing was that once I got involved with using Jesu and mercy, halfway through, I fell asleep. Mm-hmm. And I could hear your voice yet. So I was in a very different kind of space. I'd like you to comment on those kind of phenomena or experiences in meditation, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, first, thank you, Harry. That's beautifully shared and expressed. And to the point about gathering for meditation practice on Zoom, I too have been pleasantly surprised at the degree of presence and heartfulness that can come through a Zoom screen. And I'm reminded that the heart is a non-local phenomenon, that the heart really isn't limited by time or space or distance, that those connections can just jump across and through all of that. And we are all interconnected in such subtle, wild, and miraculous ways. So I'm not at all surprised that you said the invitation to move into the feet and the hands, that you received the invitation before you received the words. Those kinds of synchronous interactions, they're just very real, and they happen all the time. And that's the kind of spontaneous intuition and knowing that we are talking about, that the heart often is a few steps ahead of the head, because it's reading much more subtle information than the head is able to process. So I would just pay attention to that, and I thank you for sharing that experience. As to, there was one more point you asked about. Do you remember what it was?
Falling asleep but not being totally asleep. It was a deep sense, but I could hear your voice, and I was quite content where I was.
So it made me think of the line from the Song of Songs, when the voice, the author of the Song of Songs, says, "I sleep, but my heart is awake." And that's that sense that the physical being can move into rest, and the heart can actually be in a profound state of wakefulness. And often the heart is more able to connect and communicate when we let the other systems that we usually have running the show, when they're sort of slowed down, the heart can step forward. So that's just what I heard was, I sleep, but my heart is awake, from the Song of Songs. So
thanks very much. Thank you.
Any other sharings by voice? Then I want to look over at the chat and see if there's anything for Sharon to read to us. Or I can look. Someone said, "I dropped deep into prayer comfortably. I used to practice the Jesus prayer daily for years, and it came roaring back today." Thank you for that. Someone said, "I felt great comfort. Actually fell into sleep, but not entirely sure it wasn't more than just sleep." And I think that's all I see. Sharon, do you have other things through on your end?
I'm not seeing any others on my end in the chat.
Okay. All right. Any others who want to share by voice? I'm curious too about how it was for you to place a word in your heart as opposed to speaking the word in your head, and if you could feel into that difference.
This is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. I've done transcendental meditation for 25 years. So what I've experienced was that actually it was very easy to connect, in some ways easier to connect the breath to the heart than the breath to the head. Mm-hmm. So I actually found it easier to keep attention of the word in the heart space than sometimes I find when I'm doing TM. So that was an interesting experience to me, just because it was, as you said, the intersection. For some reason, it was a lot easier to keep the attention there for longer before the mind gremlins started to observe.
Yes.
Anyway, I just found that actually easier. I plan to try that this week and see how it works. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you'll report back to me or others in the circle here what that experience is like as you continue to work with it. So this is what the Eastern Christian tradition found through practice, through trial and effort, was that when awareness is placed specifically in the heart center, thoughts tend to slow of their own accord. And I find that that's really because we're not energizing the mind. We're not energizing the thinking center by placing attention in it. And so it's kind of like if you think about a box fan, you've got an electric fan that's whirring around and around and around and around. And the minute you unplug it, the fan stops immediately, right? No, it continues spinning, but it slows and it slows and it stops. And I find that's what the mind is like. So if we keep the mind plugged in, we're energizing it by placing attention, it keeps whirring, it keeps whirring. But if we take the sacred word out, the plug out of the outlet and place it into the heart, then the mind just begins slowing down because it's not being energized. Awareness is in the heart and thoughts tend to still much more easily and quickly. And we can sort of rest in this kind of honeyed, sweet, spacious place, and there's not as much interference from the mental center. So I think that is a real wisdom of this practice that's often gone overlooked for those of us who have been trained in practices that are a little more mental centered. What else to say about that?
Also,
Yeah.
less concern about whether it's being done correctly.
Yes, yeah, because that is a concern of the mind. That's our mental, rational, egoic mind saying, am I doing it right? Do I have the directions exactly right? And when you're in the heart, those questions fall away. Not those questions fall away. Questions and thinking fall away because we're just in spacious, tender, loving presence. And all of that just sort of steps aside. And the minute you find that's being energized again, you just redirect awareness again to the heart center. And Theophan is very clear about this. He says as much that thoughts begin to slow. And he also points out that in practice, when this is a new practice, we may initially only feel the faintest stirrings, what he calls the beginnings of future warmth. But warmth is a key word throughout this tradition. Almost all the writers about prayer of the heart speak of a quality of warmth that awakens in the heart. And that as the warmth grows in strength through the placement of our attention, it becomes easier to hold attention there. The warmth supports the attention and the attention increases the warmth. So he says they grow in strength together. And again, it's growing that magnetic center, and it's growing a new seed of selfhood. This is my core self rather than this, or this is another core of myself. We don't have to put them at odds with each other. It's not head versus heart. We want heart-mind. We want heart-mind entrainment rather than heart-mind duality. Any other responses?
Hi, my name is Joanne. I'm sorry I haven't been able to switch out of my work email here.
Oh, no worries. Hi, Joanne.
I've done centering prayer for a number of years, and whoops, if I put my camera down, and I'm used to placing my hands on my heart. So that is a part.
Oh, you've muted yourself. There you
Sorry
are.
about that when I was shifting. But I very much appreciate Jesu mercy, because for that, that has a purity or a simplicity that the traditional Eastern prayer does not have for me. So I appreciate you sharing that phrase.
Yes, and that's some of the earliest forms of the Jesus prayer seem to have just been the name of Jesus, Yeshua on the breath, Yeshua or Yesu on the breath. And then it grew into more and more, complicated forms. Another lovely, simple form for those of you who have devotion to Our Lady Saint Mary is to use the Hail Mary as a mantra. To breathe in, you can breathe in Hail Mary and breathe out full of grace, or just breathe in Hail and breathe out Mary, or Yesu, mercy. But yes, I found the simpler forms of the Jesus prayer a little easier, that the overwordiness of some of those methods can become distracting. And I know they work beautifully for others, so there's no right or wrong method. Any others? I know we're coming up on time for me to turn it over to Mark for a few concluding words on his end. So maybe one last comment if it's, actually, we've got some things in the chat. So there's a question: would your use of the word heart parallel the Christian mystics, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, use of the word soul? That's an interesting question that would require a lot of some nuance here. So makes me want to draw on the board here. In a very brief nutshell, I'll try to say, St. Paul gives us a tripartite understanding of the human person. He says that the human person is body, soul, and spirit. Body, soul, and spirit. And in his Greek, that's body is soma. Body. Can you see that? Body. Soul is, I've got my languages backwards. Soul is psyche. And spirit is pneuma. So soma, psyche, pneuma are the layers of the human person, according to St. Paul. And soma is our physical body. It's not, when Paul talks about the flesh being at war with the spirit, he doesn't use soma. In those cases, he uses the word sarx, which I think we better translate as ego rather than flesh. It's really the ego. But soma, the body is good. Soma is the physical embodiment of who we are. Psyche is our unique individuated self, our psyche. And then pneuma is the point of the human person. This is the same word as Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God. So there's a point in the human person that opens onto and is one with the infinite Spirit of God, the pneuma of God. And in Paul's model, you want these three flowing in harmony together. You want them flowing one into the other. So pneuma, the infinite, flows into and informs our unique little bundle of divine qualities. That's our unique selfhood. And that flows into and manifests through soma, our body. What tends to happen is, especially in contemporary culture, we've drawn a line here. We've cut ourselves off to the depth dimension of our being. And some of us are obsessed with soma. We're at the gym all the time, working on our bodies, and we're really identified with our physical self, which is not bad, but we can become over-identified with that. Or, hey, we go to therapy once a week, we're doing our psychological work, we're really fused with the sense of our psychological self, our psyche. But these all move into wholeness when we then open to the depth dimension through contemplative practice, pneuma. And so when pneuma flows into psyche, flows into soma, we become an integrity. And what the contemplative tradition says is what manifests when these are moving in alignment is cardia, heart. So then we get cardia, the heart. So the heart is the human person in its fullness. When body, soul, and spirit are an integrity, are a unity, the heart of God manifests through that unity. So I would say that's what heart is. Heart is the fullness of the human person fully alive. And soul is what happens when spirit meets body. The body is the finite, spirit is the infinite. When the infinite comes into a finite body, it manifests as a unique soul. So the soul is the mediating point, the unique instantiation that each of us are of the meeting of body and infinite spirit. And there's one other question. Henry Nouwen talks about the head descending into the heart. And it took me a long while to understand that until a few years ago. This practice is so wonderfully freeing from the mind. Beautiful. And now it's 4:29, so that gives Mark 1 minute. Any final responses from others before Mark takes the reins from us? All right, over to you, dear Mark.
Matthew, that was amazing. Every time I get a chance to do this work with you, I find myself learning new things and expanding in ways that I could have never predicted. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm excited that we have a couple more opportunities to spend some time with you. The next visit with you will be on January 9th, so we'll be able to ring in the new year with some more of your wisdom. And then everybody should know that we have planned a full day workshop in May. And so that you'll be getting information about that as well. Make sure you mark your calendars for January 9th, because that's the next time we'll be with Matthew. And I should also probably mention that we will be having another opportunity to dive into some of these contemplative practices that have been buried in the various traditions, our own and others, with a buddy of Matthew's. Mark Kudalowski is a friend of Matthew's, and Mark has his own sort of unique practice that is very centered on using the body and the senses in order to experience direct encounters with the divine. He's a wilderness guide. He's trained many people at Dartmouth in survival skills over a 15-year period, and he will be offering a Zoom workshop like this on October 7th, Thursday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And then shortly after that, another 10 days later or 9 days later on the 16th, he'll be in Southport, and we will be spending the day with Mark, learning some of the practices that he has found helpful in his contemplative work. And we'll be spending the day outdoors on a beautiful fall day, God willing. So mark your calendars for that. And then one last thing is that looking a little bit further ahead, we will be launching the men's issues thread with the senior editor of the Good Men Project on October 23rd. And there's a lot of work to be done there. So we'll look forward to diving into all that. But I guess we should close off for now. I hate to say goodbye, but it's actually just until later, Matthew. And I'm just want to wish everybody, as I always do, a farewell with my favorite saying: may you be happy, may you be well, may you be safe, may you be peaceful and at ease until we meet again. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. And may we all see more and more with the eye of our hearts. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.